anywhere where there is new sort of technology or sort of money and interest in sort of some technology, there's going to be people trying to rip other people off. We need to guard against that. The company I'm working for now is Versatis. And I know this is a podcast about sort of failed startups, but this one's going to be the exception. I promise. Those sorts of things are actually being actively used today in investigations into things like atrocities and war crimes in sort of some parts of the world at the moment. We're not just handing over all of our personal information to a large company and hoping that they do the right thing with it. So there are two major sort of sides to the whole AI thing. There's those that think it's going to save the world and those that think it's going to destroy it. I think both could be true, but I think as a society we'll probably find a nice happy medium. And that was great. So I've had sort of probably 100 sort of siblings over the sort of while I was growing up. Good old Australian saying, get your head out your ass. Keep your focus and don't assume that you can and have to do everything. I think just sort of keep yourself grounded. Make sure you're sort of constantly in tune with your customers and your audience, the industry that you're trying to solve, and the people around you. Make sure that you're doing the best you can with what you are able to do.
Hi Matt, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on.
Great, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So look, let's just get straight into it. Tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and how you become one of those fascinating creatures called entrepreneurs.
I think I started out back in the mid-90s in Australia, in South Australia, Adelaide specifically, and I was looking to get out of work in hospitality. I've been working in kitchens, wanted to get into tech, and I think startups, either whether they're my own or working with somebody else or for somebody else in a startup, has always been more attractive to me than sort of some of the large bureaucracy you get in some of the larger companies. Rather than just being a small little tiny cog in a big machine, I think working in a startup, you have more influence over success or sometimes the failure of the project. You get to have more of an impact, I feel.
Yeah, definitely. And like I've worked in large organizations as well, and to get some sort of innovation happening, it's can be really, really slow process. And a lot of people I found talk about innovation and it's just talk.
Yeah, I think the first tech company that I worked for was actually the South Australian government, and so that may have been part of the reason why I then moved more towards startups. And
yeah, same thing. I worked for a large government organisation as well, and just progress was so slow. But, so it's great to be able to affect change really quickly and to try different things. And do you think it's like it takes a special type of personality, or like you said, do you think there's anything else in your life that sort of made you want to get into the startup world and work in that sort of area?
Yeah, I don't know if it takes a special type of person necessarily. Maybe it's something that can be learned too, but I've always liked to create things. I'm a software engineer. I write software. I don't write software to have it not used. And so I think being able to churn things out quickly as good sort of quality product, but do that quickly and with a lot of agility, that sort of really suits me. I get to sort of see the results of my work. I get to see people using it. And so that's one of the things that I think sort of drives me towards that.
Now, as you know, this podcast is really geared towards early stage startup founders. And so, you know, having so much experience or diverse experience in the space from, you know, tech roles, system, software engineering and leadership positions as well, what are your thoughts on the space at the moment? And because there's a lot of things happening now. I know you work around the decentralized space and crypto and all that sort of area, which I find fascinating. And there's AI coming in as well now. Mm-hmm. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, and what's happening at the moment, and what do you see happening over the next few years, and what sort of opportunities could startup founders have in that area?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing now is just yet another sort of cycle. There's always hype cycles around things. Every investor's throwing money at companies that just have the words, the letter AI in their name, just because that's the latest big thing. We were doing the same thing with companies that started with the lowercase letter I or E back in the early 2000s. We sort of go through some of these sort of fads. That's not to say that technology itself is worthless. I think there's a lot of people trying to jump on that bandwagon. So like anything, it's like if you're looking to sort of work for a startup in that area or looking to create something, I think it's worth looking at the technical merit behind whatever that is. And the same goes for the decentralization, Web3 and crypto space.
Yeah.
Rather than looking for something that's just got the latest buzzwords, looking for something that's really solving a problem that somebody has, or making something better, or making something easier. And so for me, that's sort of where I would go if I was either trying to start something or if I was trying to join another company or join a project. Looking for somebody that's really trying to, they've identified a problem or sort of some sort of area, and they're trying to sort of create a solution for that.
Mm. So, I mean, you've been involved with quite a few startups over the years, and currently you're with the Versatis, which is in the decentralized space. So tell us a bit about, you know, that experience. And have you had your own startups as well?
Yeah, I have.
Why don't you start with that? Tell us about that experience and any obstacles you may have had and the journey you went through that, particularly if it was, say, your first one. Because there's founders at the moment that are going through that whole experience.
Yeah, for me, it was a little bit easier than a lot of startup founders for my first project. That I decided, rather than going out and trying to get a lot of financial backing to go and create a product, I decided to bootstrap that myself and go more down a services path for the most part. And that's where the bread and butter would come from while I was working in conjunction with other folks on sort of other potential products. That made it easier because I can sort of sell my services by the hour. I don't need to sort of start off with a large amount of capital, get a few sort of subcontractors on sort of a bit at a time as needed. And so that was probably easier for me. The challenge is, and I think this is the case for any sort of startup founder that I've come across, is working out where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are and delegating the stuff that you are weak at. I knew that I was going to be terrible at all of the administrative stuff. I don't like doing invoices. I don't like bookkeeping. But if you don't do those things, you don't have any money. I do like writing software, so I wrote a piece of software that would do that for me. So all I had to do was just keep track of, in a document when I started a job, what I was spending my time on, and the software would then add letterhead to that, do all the taxation or currency conversion, and sort of send out a PDF of the invoice. I wouldn't have to do a lot of work. And so I made that enjoyable. There are other things that I didn't want to do that I would pay people to do. But I think identifying the things that where your time is best spent and where you have the most skills, I think is a really important thing. Particularly if you're creating something that's your own. It's yours, it's your baby. You want to make sure that every aspect of it works. But I think we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and being able to delegate some of the stuff that you may not be as good at or don't want to be as good at, I think is a good start.
Yeah. If you're not enjoying it, I mean, look, when you start, you got to do everything. But what about the sales and marketing area? That was always my weakness. How did you deal with that? Did you delegate that? What did you do in that area?
Yeah, so I didn't do anything sort of particularly formal with that. Most of what I was doing, particularly given it was services based in that first case, I was a little bit lucky in that there was a lot of open source community around, particularly in Australia and over here in the US at the moment, and sort of participating in a lot of that, hanging out on forums and giving people advice when they've got problems, helping people out with stuff, contributing source code to projects. Those kinds of things get you a bit of a reputation for being helpful and useful. And that's kind of how a lot of the rest of my career has been bootstrapped, has been people looking for something and they sort of see your name out there and figure you can give them a hand and that you're a reasonable human being. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're building up your network, you're helping out others, and it's all about network. So I mean, recently I interviewed Ravel. He was the guy that actually started.
Great guy.
So you know him. So started Twitter and brought in Jack Dorsey and fantastic story. It's amazing. And
Yeah.
You were saying it's all about networks as well, like in Silicon Valley. So you're based in San Fran, right? Are you actually?
I'm in Santa Clara, which is a city just sort of down the peninsula from San Francisco, near San Jose, but in Silicon Valley in the Bay Area. Yeah.
Okay. So you're an Aussie, right? So how did you end up there? Tell us about, what happened that you went over there? Like, to just pack your bags and I'm going to Silicon Valley, or what's the story behind that?
Yeah, well, it was a long swim. So I had my business in Australia, and I was at a bit of a crossroads where, again, this was a services-based company. I was doing training courses for defense and telcos, and I was running software for the electricity grid and doing a lot of stuff. But after a while, I was doing a lot of the same kinds of stuff, and I wasn't being challenged myself. And so I was at a bit of a crossroads with a company where I could look at onboarding someone else that might be a bit more junior and bring them up to speed with some of the things I've been doing so I can grow them. They can help me by taking on some of those jobs, and I can go out looking for something more sort of substantial, or I could go do something else. And as I'm having this conversation, I was sitting on Rundle Street in Adelaide with my mum, having a coffee. We're discussing exactly this, and completely serendipity, an email came from a startup here in California saying, effectively, we know who you are and what you do. How soon can you be in Sunnyvale, California? And at that point, I had no desire to travel, and particularly sort of over here, I didn't have any sort of burning desire to jump on a plane and come here. But I had a few weeks where I wasn't super busy and with work, and so asked them what they were looking for, and jumped on a plane. I think I landed 4 days after getting the email, hung out here for a few weeks, and spent the next 9 months essentially sort of consulting with them and contracting with them to help them fill in a gap they had in the development of their product. And in the end, they couldn't find anyone else to hire full-time for that. So they started talking about visas in a full-time position. And so, I ended up over here.
Right. And how long have you been there?
So I landed September 13, 2006. So about 17 and a half years.
Right. And you get back to Australia often, or?
Yeah, usually sort of once a year or once every 2 years, depending. COVID was a bit of a challenge. They weren't letting Australian citizens back in the country, so I was over here for a bit longer. But I try to get back whenever I can.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah,
I've got to go back and practice my Australian accent.
Sounds pretty good to me.
One of the reasons why I decided to stay here, once I was over here and they sort of offered me a job and to stay over here, was there were, at the time, at least sort of to about sort of late 2000s, there was a lot of innovation centered here in the Bay Area. And so I was constantly working alongside people that were so much smarter than me or knew so much more than me about stuff, and I could just soak all that up like a sponge. I could learn as much as I could. I do think that sort of mid-2000s, there was more decentralization, a lot of companies starting to maybe sort of have a headquarters somewhere like Austin or Seattle, where it's sort of a bit cheaper.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen that sort of play out a bit more. And the same goes for sort of during COVID and post-COVID, there's been even more of that. But certainly for the first half of the stay here so far, it's been a real sort of hotbed of innovation. And again, I've been able to learn from so many really smart and intelligent people from all over the world.
Yeah, it would be an amazing place to be, I'm sure. So, I mean, started off in tech and software engineer, and then you got into leadership roles. And when I actually spoke to Ravel, I said, is there anything you regret? And one of the things was not taking on leadership or management roles earlier. So it looks like, you're doing that. And how have you found that transition? And what advice would you give to early stage startup founders, or especially devs, that are like, because I found that a lot as well. No, we just want to do the dev work and that's the career for the rest of our life. What are your thoughts around that? What sort of advice would you give?
Yeah, well, I think given that I'm working for startups that are so small at the moment, we're talking companies that have less than 20 people in them, as much as there's a lot of leadership sort of work involved and mentorship, there's also still a lot of hands-on as well. So for me, doing that in a startup, I wouldn't be able to do that in a large company. I would have to be one or the other. And for me, I do want to sort of keep my skills up. I do enjoy contributing things and creating stuff. But a number of years ago, I was talking to a couple of mentors of mine in particular, and they sort of helped me to understand that as an individual contributor, there's only a certain number of hours in the day, and that means there's a certain number of lines of code that you can write each day. To be more productive and more effective, sometimes it's better to be able to help the people around you to be able to also sort of contribute to the best of their abilities. And by doing that, all of you are sort of essentially more productive. So I really took that to heart. I've always liked sort of helping some of the junior engineers that we've had working in all of the teams I've worked on to try to learn new things and try and sort of become proficient with some of the technologies that they're looking at. And so for me, it's a good balance. I still am very, very hands-on, writing lines of code every day, but I also get to help really passionate, willing engineers to be able to also achieve their goals. And because they're sort of common goals, it helps us all. So,
yeah, it must be satisfying helping out others as well in that area. Yeah. So that's awesome. Well, so also these days, like with AI, I know we talked a little bit about that, but I know that there's AI now that you start coding a line and then it does the rest for you. Okay, so it all spits up. Like, are you using anything like that?
So me personally, I haven't been. A lot of what I'm developing at the moment hasn't been done before. And if you look at a lot of these large language model AI tools, a lot of them are going and learning from things that exist and can create those. So it's good for creating boilerplate code, the sort of stuff that you have to do that's just time consuming and there's usually quite a lot of it. You can have it generate a lot of that, but for some of the sort of innovative stuff that we're doing, there isn't anything for a language model to learn from. And so a lot of that we're still doing very much by hand. And I know sort of there's sort of two major sort of sides to the whole AI thing. There's those that think it's going to save the world and those that think it's going to destroy it. I think both could be true, but I think as a society, we'll probably find a nice happy medium. But it's just the same as when computers started to be introduced into jobs. We were told that was going to replace everybody's jobs. Calculators were going to replace our jobs and things as well. I think this is just going to become another tool that we're going to be able to use to allow us to do more, better, quicker.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. There was some research that was showing that AI can help. Let's say if you have a level of like 1 to 100, so people that are like really top experts in their job, it can't help them very much at all. But those who are in like the lower 50% and down, it has massive, it's very, very helpful. It brings them up to that, higher level.
Yeah, one of the risks around that too is for somebody like me that's sort of quite senior, quite proficient, the things I would use that for are some of the more mundane tasks that it would be able to do. So writing large numbers of tests, going and maybe refactoring some code or doing a lot of boilerplate stuff. Those are some of the sorts of things that you might get junior engineers to do to sort of cut their teeth and sort of learn certain patterns and that kind of thing. My only worry is that we rely on AI too much for that, and there's less support there for people trying to get into the industry. They'll probably end up using those tools and become better at prompting them, but there's also something to be said for actually hands-on doing some of these things to understand how it works. But I think this is a problem that we've seen before. In the tech space, a lot of application developers are used to now writing applications that run in something called containers. I don't know if you've sort of across those, but it's a way to make sure that your code runs the same no matter what the hardware is. It can run up in the cloud, it can run locally, it doesn't matter. And so as a result, a lot of developers don't necessarily know how their code interacts with specific hardware anymore. And so these are all evolutions, and I think there's pros and cons to all of it. It's again another sort of pattern that I sort of think we've seen sort of repeating itself a little bit.
Yeah, I want to dive a bit more into the whole decentralized space. So can you tell us about the company you're currently with? Versatis, is it pronounced correctly? Versatis?
It's the company I'm working for now is Versatis, and I know this is a podcast about sort of failed startups, but this one's going to be the exception. I promise. So Versatis is working on work in the decentralized space, but we're trying to build a suite of technology, a platform that allows traditional software developers that aren't familiar with Web3 technologies like blockchain and smart contracts and things to be able to write software using the tools that they're familiar with and have those work with Web3. Traditionally, if you're dealing with blockchain and trying to write software called smart contracts or whatever, you would go out and learn a new set of languages, new set of tools, and it's a very high, steep learning curve. We're trying to allow developers to use the language they're used to, the tools they're used to be able to build these smart contracts and other applications for a decentralized network. And we're sort of seeing a lot of projects in this space that are more conscious of people's privacy. And so we're starting to try to onboard more developers so we can see more applications like that, where we're not just handing over all of our personal information to a large company and hoping that they do the right thing with it. So that's kind of where we are at the moment.
Yeah, that's huge because that is one of the things that's holding the space back a bit. I think that'd be amazing. But
and so Rabble as well, you mentioned his current project Noster is another great example of some of this that's a bit easier to sort of understand without getting into the technical details. They have something that looks and feels a bit like Twitter, but it's completely decentralized. There's no single company that owns your data. You own that personally. And so there's a lot of projects like that, and we're helping to build tools to make it easier for developers to be able to build more projects like that. So
I think it's very much needed, and it's very much in the news at the moment as well. A lot of that space is happening in that space. So, I think a lot of people really don't really understand the whole decentralized space, and they mix things up with crypto and exchanges and How do you explain to people, what is the decentralized space and what is how it works and what are the advantages of that over centralized?
Well, firstly, I think that your average sort of user shouldn't need to worry too much about what the crypto stuff is or the blockchain stuff. These applications that we're helping developers to be able to build will just work seamlessly like they do today. And ideally, you won't know that there's any difference. You'll just be using something that's now safer and more private. Generally, if you hear people talking about things like blockchain, crypto, Web3, decentralization, it'll all come back to the price of a token on an exchange somewhere. So how much is Bitcoin worth today? If you're thinking in those sorts of terms about speculative investment, you're probably looking at this the wrong way as well, I think. What Bitcoin did was to provide a solution to the problem of having many people agree and get consensus in a completely untrusted network. And that's been the basis for things like some of these cryptocurrencies, but also for the sharing of information or the keeping of information private. And so we're using this for being able to move all sorts of information around with an entire network in agreement that is what's happening. And so that's allowing us to do a whole range of other things. And the decentralization part of this is we don't need to have all of this running on a public cloud that's owned by one of four companies, Amazon, Google, and the like. Instead, we can all participate in these networks, and just by running a machine with a piece of software on it at home, you can be participating in a network that helps to prove that everything else is secure and helps to provide other services for folks needing this stuff. You see sort of examples that will sort of continue to pop up around war-torn countries and trying to get uncensored sort of footage and documentation of atrocities and things out. And they're being able to use things like content addressability and other decentralized technologies to be able to put their content out there so that it's out there and can't be censored. And we can also validate that, yes, it is from them and it hasn't been tampered with. And those sorts of things are actually being actively used today in investigations into things like atrocities and war crimes in sort of some parts of the world at the moment. So for things like that, or decentralized science, where it's possible for people to collaboratively do a lot of research instead of having to get a huge amount of funding from big pharma, who may then want to keep all of that IP and not share it. There's ways for us to sort of better some of these sorts of use cases, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a great believer in it. I actually run some nodes for Gala. You've probably heard of Gala. So I've got like a music node, a film node, and a founders node. So
perfect.
Yeah. But the only thing is, like, also the space has got a bit of a reputation for the big hacks, or the FTX that went down and lost their money. But that is not decentralized. That is using crypto coins and exchange that is centralized, and that is the
and if you look at the FTX case specifically, and there's many other cases like that, that's probably the biggest one that people know, that's less of a crypto hack, and that's more in line with what banks have been doing and sometimes getting away with and sometimes not, for as long as banks have been around. It's a centralized organization that did the wrong thing, broke the law. We already have laws that cover this kind of fraud, and so he's going to have to pay the price for that. It's not a crypto specific thing. Anywhere where there is new sort of technology or sort of money and interest in sort of some technology, there's going to be people trying to rip other people off. We need to guard against that. As far as fraud's concerned, there's not really been any in the crypto space, whereas I think the American dollar is probably the most sort of counterfeited currency around. People are always going to use these things for good and for evil. We just need to sort of try to keep ahead about ourselves, not go handing over our keys or anything to anybody else. And
I think we're in the space where, like you're trying to do now, making the code a lot easier and it can be applied anywhere. When all the holding the keys and transferring and all of that is a lot simpler and easier for people to do and still secure. But it's going to take off even more. But even like with Bitcoin, like my wife's from Argentina, recently new government went in, inflation went up to 120%. So that can solve those sort of problems, because, even though it's fluctuating a lot, eventually I think it'll, they can't create.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bitcoin.
Yeah, and it's, back to the network effect. The more people that are using some of this stuff for whatever use, it doesn't necessarily just have to be for moving funds around, but that network effect is going to bring stability and reduce the amount of volatility. We'll start to see some of these use cases, sort of visionary use cases, sort of come to fruition. But I do think there's a lot out there that's usable today. The Nostr protocol that you were talking with Rabble about is a great example of that. That's something that's usable today. It is decentralized. And there'll be more that'll be added to that. And there's some other applications and things too. But I think what the Web3 and sort of decentralized community is realizing is that it is about making it easy to use and seamless. And not just about having a graphical wallet, but making it the experience as easy as it is today for developers and for users as using Facebook or Twitter or Google.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as you know, like the name of this show is Fail Wisdom.
Yep.
And I know you've just been talking about something that's going to be very successful. I'm sure it will be, which is fantastic. But I want you to go back and talk about maybe like the biggest fail that you've had in the startup world or anywhere really. And what happened, talk to the story, and then what lessons you learned from that.
Yeah, I think I'll do a bit of a hybrid one and change some of their names to protect the guilty. But I think there's been some common patterns that I've seen in startups that I've either tried to do myself or that I've been involved in working for other people that haven't worked out. I think so probably two main things. I think one thing is to understand what problem you're trying to solve. It could be something as simple as entertainment. It doesn't have to be sort of curing cancer or whatever. But if you're building a product, that product needs to do something that people need. Otherwise, they're not going to paying money for it, or whatever your revenue model is. And so being clear about what that is, and it can change, but being very clear about what that is, I think, is the first thing. I sort of worked for a company that had it was a network switch that they started doing. It was their own branded hardware and a lot of their own software. And I said, well, why would people buy this over any of the incumbent stuff? Because there's many switch vendors out there, big names that making billions of dollars a year. And they said, well, our driver's written by us and it's written in Go, which is a programming language. And to me, that's not... As somebody that would be buying that stuff, that's not a compelling reason for that. You probably want something on top of that that says just why that is something that people need, or what problem that solves. Yeah. They made a good decision, I think, and actually pivoted the company a little bit to go down a different path that was more successful. But I think, to me, that was an example of something that didn't, at least when they were sort of articulating it to me, didn't quite... have that focus in that direction. And I think the second thing where sort of startups tend to sort of be a bit lacking, or areas where they could do better, is keeping that focus. It's easy to get distracted by industry trends or money coming in. Another company I was working for, this is not the only sort of case of this, but this one in particular had a particular market in mind for this product they were developing. It was a piece of software that would allow you to build your own private cloud. And they got interest from another sort of sector of the industry and what they were doing, and were sort of thrown small bits of money for a few sort of piecemeal instances of this stuff. But it wasn't their core market and wasn't the core demographic they were going for. And instead, they kept trying to do little tiny patches for very little money, adding sort of big features for very little money for this sort of side group. And that took focus away from getting the product to where I think their intended market was. And as a result, as a startup, they ran out of money. So I think keep your focus. Again, you can change focus if it's a conscious decision. You've done the research, but I think it's easy to get distracted with other industry trends, or sort of a little bit of money being thrown around and sort of chasing shiny objects and not sort of seeing something through to completion. So I think those are the two big things that I've seen.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's like that 80-20 rule, you know?
Yep.
Yeah. So I actually remember somebody telling me a story, like a startup that got, a lot of investment money. And then I think they spent the first 2 weeks looking at, what sort of logo can we do? And, and spent a whole lot of money on that. And it's like, no, that's not your focus. Obviously you want good branding and everything else, but
100%.
On what's important and who your main customers are and main segment. But that can change.
Yeah.
But like you can pivot a lot, and you sort of need to sometimes if it's not working out. But you need, like you said, you need to do the research. So,
and Mercedes, even in the last sort of 12 months, we've sort of seen industry trends sort of change slightly in what we're doing, and we've changed focus. The underlying source code, the product that we're working on, is still largely the same, but the way we're sort of positioning it in the market and some of the features that we're prioritizing over other features, because we're very limited in resources, we've been able to change that, and I think that's going to sort of prove to be a successful decision. But that was done with all of us sort of thinking it through, doing the research, and then sort of taking some action, not just sort of wildly throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall and trying to see what sticks.
Yeah. So obviously you do a lot of customer research as well.
Yeah.
Get all the feedback and do that. Okay, that makes sense. All right, so what's next for you? What do you want to do in the future? What are you looking at?
Yeah, really enjoying what I'm doing at the moment. I think that the problems that we're trying to solve now with Mercedes and in the future, I think the way I see it is we will eventually be able to create a decentralized version of what AWS is with their cloud services. So that's a really big thing at the moment for me. I think so once we've taken the Mercedes project to its success and it's time to look at something else, I think more along the lines of this decentralization stuff. I think that aligns sort of with my ideals about sort of sharing. I've always been involved in open source, and I think the more that we can sort of help out organizations and industries and things, or geographical regions that don't have what we have here in the US or in Australia, I think the better we'll be as a society. And I think software can be a big part of that. So I'd like to do some of that. I would like to do it, go up myself again, sort of start up a new project of my own in the future. That's going to be a case of me sitting and mulling over a bunch of things for a while and working out, again, what that right problem is for me to solve, something that I can do and deliver that's going to make people feel like they need whatever that is. So I don't have anything in mind at the moment. Heads down with the Versatis stuff at the moment, but that's kind of where I'll be looking in the future. But anything sort of decentralized and sort of community driven that solves a problem.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Really important area as well, the decentralization. So it's affecting a lot of people, and keep going with it because it's doing a lot of good.
Yeah, I mean, even just today, I got another email from Google telling me that there'd been yet another data breach, and they found a whole bunch of my private information on yet another dark website. So for all of this trust that we're putting in these large companies, they've shown that they're not able to fulfill that. And so if we start with some of these networks, these decentralized networks that assume that you can't trust anybody, and that it's down to you and your keys, that is sort of a little more difficult for sort of new users at the moment, and we'll sort of solve that. But I think I'm willing to sort of suffer the pain of some of these early technologies to get this stuff working.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that, definitely. And like here in Australia as well, massive data breaches, like affecting like 10 million people, like phone companies and Medicare, and it's really bad at the moment. So very much what you're doing is very much needed. So well. Okay, so I know you've given quite a bit of advice already, but if there was just one piece of advice you could give for a new startup founder, and let's just say it's in the sort of space that you're in, what would that be, Matt?
Yeah, I think good old Australian saying, get your head out your ass. Keep your focus and don't assume that you can and have to do everything. I think just sort of keep yourself grounded. Make sure you're sort of constantly in tune with your customers and your audience, the industry that you're trying to solve, and the people around you. Make sure that you're doing the best you can with what you are able to do. You don't have to be the one to do everything, and that's really difficult for a startup founder to be able to do. I think being able to delegate some of those things to other folks where they've got the strengths and the interest, I think those are difficult things to do, but it'll mean you're more successful and more efficient in the long run.
Great advice. Okay, so to finish off, what is a question you wish people asked you that no one has ever asked you?
I don't know.
Something about yourself that you may want others to know, and no one's asked you that.
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest. When I come from a long line of sort of gypsies, my mother's side of the family were all gypsies, and so a lot of what we had was all stories, family stories. And I think as a result, there's a lot of storytelling and things. So I don't necessarily wait to be asked questions. I think maybe a lot of the stories that I've told my friends and colleagues and things have probably been unsolicited. So I'm not necessarily waiting for the questions. But I don't know.
Been one of those stories that you remember.
Well, I think this is just some stuff about me and my background. I think when I was 4 years old, my parents sort of took me and my sister aside and said, we have a happy family, right? And I said, well, yeah, of course. And I said, we've always got shelter and food, and don't always necessarily get the toys and treats that we want, but we don't go without anything, and we're safe here, right? And we're like, yeah. And my mum said, well, not all families are like that. There are a lot of kids out there that don't have a safe place to live, don't have warm clothes and shelter, and sometimes don't even have food. And obviously me and my sister were pretty shocked about that. And So she asked us if we would mind opening our house up and letting some of those kids stay with us. So she was basically asking me and my sister if we were okay with us fostering children.
Yeah.
And of course we said, absolutely, we'll get brothers and sisters to play with, and fantastic, we're helping out, and that was great. So I've had sort of probably 100 sort of siblings over the sort of while I was growing up. Sometimes they'd be there for 8 hours, and sometimes it'd be 8 years. You'd wake up in the morning, there'd be a couple of extra bodies in the bed next to you that weren't there yesterday. Show them where the bathroom and breakfast are, and they may be out the door a couple of hours later, just needed somewhere to stay overnight where it was safe. And so for me, that's just, growing up that way, I got to see a lot of people from a wide variety of backgrounds, and a lot of them were coming from really unsafe places. A lot of them had sort of medical and mental health issues that maybe their parents weren't able to deal with. And so it's a wide variety of people that grew up in a wide variety of different ways. And I think as inconvenient as it is sometimes to share a bedroom with somebody, whether you're related to them or not, I think I wouldn't have changed that for anything. I think it's really helped me to empathize with other people and to sort of see things from other people's perspectives. And that sort of helped me throughout my career and things as well. It's just a little bit of something from out of nowhere.
That's amazing. It's an amazing story. I just imagine, a 4-year-old, hearing that talk.
My mum was playing a Jedi mind trick on me, absolutely. But we went for it, and I wouldn't change it for anything. Again, it's not always convenient, and it was sort of friction at times. But I wouldn't change it for anything else. And I do think that for all the kids that came and stayed with us, I think they all left in a better state than when they arrived. So
that's just wonderful. Your mother must be an amazing woman.
100%. Yeah, if I could be half the woman that she was.
I tell you what, I'd love to interview her on another podcast, but that's an amazing story. And it's really, I guess, shaped, like you said, who you are today. And like at the moment, what you're doing is trying to do some good in the world and bring about, change in that decentralized area. So, wow, I really appreciate you. Sorry?
I said I'm trying.
Yeah. Well, that's what it's all about. You're trying, and I'm sure that you'll do really well in that area.
Thanks.
So yes, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Matt, and sharing all your knowledge and wisdom. And I'm sure it'll be helpful to other early stage startup founders, particularly in that sort of space.
Thanks so much for having me, and I hope it's of interest to some of your listeners.
No, I'm sure will. Absolutely. All right. Thanks so much, Matt.
Thanks, mate.